What's going on, y'all? Shout out to the LDBC. It's your boy Fight Critic here to give you guys another video. Um, I was literally just about to start putting the finishing touches on this third episode of the Golden Boy series, and then, of course, this massive breaking news kind of just like came out. So, I think for me, ultimately, I have not taken a stance in this situation, and I have not taken a stance really because I haven't had the time to really dive into these things. I don't really pay much attention to a lot of the situations that happen, especially in this regard, just because a lot of the times it's almost like the same way that I look at how PEDs find their way into the sport of boxing. I wait for confirmation before I speak on these things. And I tackle these situations very seriously, especially when it comes to a situation in which you have this, where one fighter is alleging another fighter of something that kind of deals with contamination. And he is also alleging his team at having to take a part in that contamination. It's definitely not something that we haven't seen, in boxing. Maybe it's been over a century or maybe less than a century of it. But it's not something to say that this is the first of its kind that has ever happened. And also on the flip side, we've seen guys do this in the past, and we never get an actual answer. So I'm not going to make videos for the sake of driving up views, for the sake of pushing, what I believe on one side and why I don't believe another side. So I'm going to take the Hank Aaron approach. And of course, God rest his soul, Hank Aaron recently passed about 2 weeks ago, and Hank Aaron for the longest time was the home run king. And something that was a very underrated, characteristic of Hank Aaron was his ability to understand everything from a macro level in terms of how the media addressed him when it came to speaking on situations. And one of those situations that tends to be brought up a lot is the Barry Bonds situation. And a lot of journalists and a lot of people have always asked Hank Aaron how he feels about Barry Bonds, somebody who's been heavily accused of taking PEDs. He's shown up in the Mitchell report, and he's not in the Hall of Fame, and he owns the home run record. But because they don't have any solidified evidence that Barry Bonds took performance-enhancing drugs outside of a couple of people saying some things, and he has never admitted to it, a lot of his records hold in place, including the all-time home run title, which is something that has dwarfed Hank Aaron's previous title. Ultimately, something that nobody ever really expected, because Hank Aaron was just really good, and Hank Aaron didn't rely on PEDs in order to play the game back in the day. But when he's always asked about the Barry Bonds situation and people ask him, what's his point of view, he often says, there's really no reason for me to talk about it. And when a lot of people ask that, they say, well, baseball is a sport that's considered to be sacred. Why don't you have an opinion about this situation between, Bonds and PEDs and your home run title? And he speaks of it from the aspects to, if I were to come out and if I were to take a very, very common and expected stance against PEDs in the sport of, baseball and Barry Bonds, I would be doing exactly what not only the media, but the individuals who have been in place in this country for years like to do when it comes to these situations, which is having a black man talk poorly about another black man. And that's just not something that Hank Aaron wanted to do. So that is the stance that I'm ultimately taking in this type of situation, which involves a lot of personal beef between each other. It's not a situation of both guys jarring each other over boxing. One guy wants to beat another guy, even though I don't like the idea of Mark Breland fighting Deontay Wilder. But the reason why I want to take the Hank Aaron approach is because there is no concrete evidence that allows me to take a side. Ultimately, there is no concrete evidence for me to not defend it, because it's something that we've seen in the sport throughout it, whether it's through corruption in the sport, whether it's through tampering or contamination. We have had legitimate evidence of this happening in the past. And it's not for me to jump in and to defend the accusation also because I need that evidence. So, because of all these things, I simply have just one question I would like to give to each side who has taken a specific stance, so that this way you also need to ask yourself, a multitude of questions, but rather than me giving you guys the multitude of these questions, I'd rather just base it down into one simple question for each side. And this is not the expectation that one side I'm expecting people to just answer it right away. And this is not the expectation for another side to do it. I'm not expecting people to make videos about this. I'm not expecting people to respond to this video. I'm not expecting comments to be responded to it. But I'm simply putting this video out there for clarity. Now, if you are on Deontay Wilder's side and if you feel that Mark Breland took a hand in a potential contamination of the Tyson Fury rematch, then you have to ask yourself, well, why didn't Wilder get rid of Breland previously? And I know that's a difficult question to answer, but here's the reason why I'm asking that question. It takes a lot for a fighter to get rid of his trainer. And it's never really something that happens in a quick snap. Most guys, when they tend to leave their trainers, it's something that's been on their mind for a significant period of time. Now, unless it involves something in terms of like embezzlement where a guy lost money, and even in a similar situation like this, Wilder would need to have undeniable evidence of this in order to fire Breland, or the two of them probably weren't on the best terms for a period of time leading into the Fury fight. And if you're Wilder, if you feel like this contamination was the final straw, and if you feel that your trainer wasn't honest with you, then you probably feel like your trainer wasn't honest with you for a multitude of time leading into that fight. And on the flip side, if you're the person to take the side of Mark Breland, and you're talking about, Breland saying the comments about Wilder's work ethic, his career being over, X, Y, and Z, then you need to also ask yourself, well, Mark, if you feel as though that Deontay Wilder didn't train hard enough, he didn't do the things that he was needing to do, and that his career was a downfall, then why did you keep yourself in this situation to be working with a fighter of this type of stature? Because ultimately, there are tons of the fighters in the sport that you could be training and that you could be making your living. So why did you keep yourself in this situation? So that's the question that I pose to both of these sides. For Wilder, if you feel as though Breland wasn't honest with you and that he took part in these things that you feel strongly about, then why didn't you address it earlier? Because it kind of feels like there's something there that has built up to this moment. And if you're Breland, and if you've put yourself in a quote-unquote toxic situation for a significant period of time, why didn't you just leave? And why are you waiting till now, given the fact that you're also doing it in terms of you're giving out this information to somebody or to a platform that is based in the UK? And I don't know if that's the smartest thing to do. Now, this could just be both guys taking the revenge angle on each other, but I believe that these are two important questions that one side needs to answer and another side also needs to answer. But in the end, I don't think we're going to find these answers. And this could all be just for building up, what could happen in the future, And for a lot of people, this isn't like the first time that we've seen a fighter and his trainer beef. This kind of happens quite often. But even like in situations where let's talk about, like situations like Gennady Golovkin and Abel Sanchez. And when Gennady Golovkin decided once he got the big boy bag to fire Abel Sanchez because he's just like, I don't want to keep paying you this amount of money, that situation, you started to see all these things kind of develop from these guys and, the instances that kind of led to this moment. And you learn that them talking about and having issues about money was it was something that has been happening for a significant period of time in which both these guys just weren't on the right terms. The same thing with, Floyd Mayweather and his father. The first time around when Floyd fired his father out of nowhere, there you start to hear about a multitude of things in which both of them did not agree on leading into the firing of it. So there has to be something that has led both of these men into a series of conflicts that led to this moment? And I think that's where my questions more lie, as opposed to the after effect to it. Because I can't comment on the after effect to it because I don't have the fucking evidence behind it. So until I have that, those are the two questions that I have. And of course, if you guys have any, comments, questions, X, Y, Z, please leave them in the comment box below. I'm gonna get this Golden Boy video out today, so that's on my schedule.